Hello and welcome to today's session on health and safety, where we'll be looking at how to keep your members safe throughout your operations and activities throughout the year. So looking at the aims of today's session, we're hoping to deepen your understanding of health and safety and how to ensure that you and your members are safe. We'll be looking at what a risk assessment is and why we carry them out. We'll be looking at 5 key steps to risk assessments, as well as the meaning of hazard and risk, where to record your findings, when you review your risk assessment, how to report an incident or accident, and reviewing our guest speaker policy. And the hope is that by the end of this session, you guys will be able to conduct a risk assessment. You'll know how and why we do them, and you'll know how to report incidents and ultimately how to keep your members safe. So looking at the law, the SU has a responsibility under Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 to ensure that, so far as reasonably practical, the health and safety and welfare at work of all of our employees is protected, meaning that we do have a duty of care towards our students to protect them from harm. We're all legally responsible for our own health and safety and the health and safety of others affected by our activities, and the extent of individual responsibilities will depend on your role. Now, as you guys are all committee members, that means that you have a heightened level of responsibility in terms of protecting and safeguarding the health and safety of your members. And looking into the regulation of the management and health and safety at work regulations, that does place a legal duty of care onto employers to carry out risk assessments to protect health, safety and welfare of their employees. So again, that does apply to you guys as committee members, as well as us as a student union, hence why we're running today's session. So at the student union, we do have a code of conduct as well as a health and safety policy, and it is really important that these policies are followed and adhered to, but also that you guys read over those policies and are really competent with all of the messaging involved in that. And you can find those policies on the SU website. And just a reminder as well that for insurance reasons, we must know when and where your group's activities are taking place. It is incredibly important that you let us know if there are any activities taking place. We do need to know about all of them. So looking at a risk assessment, a risk assessment itself is a process of evaluating the potential hazards and risks that may be involved in an activity or project, including identifying factors that may cause harm, identifying the potential of those hazards to cause harm, and reducing or eliminating those risks that hazards pose. But essentially, a risk assessment is a process that people can follow, and it involves working your way through an activity or an event and thinking about all the things that could go wrong and ways that you can mitigate that risk. So why do we do risk assessments? Well, firstly, we do risk assessments to ensure that what we do is safe, and to establish that if something isn't safe, how do we change or amend it to make it safe? The function of risk assessments is to keep you, those who are working with, and others around you from harm, as well as to give you knowledge, skills and experience in risk assessments for your future career. So what you will find is that once you leave university and you go into the outside world, risk assessments are a huge part of any workplace, and you will realise that whatever job it is you're doing in the future, that you will have to do risk assessments. So the fact that you're able to, as a committee member, gain some experience in doing risk assessments now is a really valuable skill that you can take with you into the future. Looking at the 3 main reasons for doing risk assessments, firstly we have a moral obligation. So obviously, I as head of communities at the student union don't want any students in our communities getting injured or ill as a result of our activities, but also you guys as committee members, I would hope, want to protect and safeguard your members as well from harm. Obviously, there is a legal obligation as well, so it's a legal requirement to safeguard the health and safety of employees, which in this case would be our students and others that may be affected by the organisation's operations. And that is in reference to the Health and Safety at Work Act, as well as the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations. And then finally, the financial implications as well. So accidents can cost a lot of money. The student union itself is a charitable organisation that exists to support you as students. So we wouldn't want any financial losses as a result of an accident, but also if the student union or yourselves were found to be operating in an unsafe manner, we could be at risk of receiving heavy penalties in the form of fines from the Health and Safety Executive. So how do we do a risk assessment? So if we look at it as sort of 5 key steps, the first step is to identify the hazard. So that'll be the biggest challenge when doing a risk assessment of any event or activity, is to sit down and go, okay, what are the hazards for this activity? What can go wrong? Then we decide who might be harmed and how, whether that's ourselves as students or people around us. We decide on control measures and evaluate the risks. We record your findings and implement them, and then we review your assessment and update if necessary. So step 1, identifying a hazard. If a hazard is something with the potential to cause harm, how do we identify these? Hazards can often be categorised. So examples could include mechanical, such as machinery or equipment, chemical, so solid, liquid or gas, including wood dust or vapours or fumes, as well as cleaning products. Biological hazards, which could include bacteria and viruses, as well as plants, animals, such as insect bites or poisonous plants. Physical hazards, including slips, trips and falls. Ergonomic hazards, which can be from things like manual lifting or repetitive movement. Environmental hazards, which could include weather, altitude, tides, natural disasters and rough terrain. Psychological hazards, which can be things that could take a toll on people's mental health, including stress, heavy workloads or aggression, or dealing with the general public. Different ways of working can often include many different hazards in one activity. So for example, a study or a field trip or travel and transport could include loads of different hazards going on at the same time. And then we also look at risk in this process as well. So we identify a hazard, something that has the potential to cause harm, and then we say, okay, what's the chance of that hazard causing harm, and also if someone was to be exposed to a hazard, what would be the severity of that hazard. So moving into step 2, this is deciding how or who might be harmed and how they might be harmed. So once we've identified a hazard, we then need to understand who may be at risk of that hazard and how they might be at risk as well. So is it students or staff that you're working with? Is it visitors to campus? Or is it members of the public? And at that point, we then need to think, how could they be harmed in general? Is it injury, ill health, or equipment or property damage? Where are the risks there? So moving on to step 3, Deciding on control measures and evaluating the risks. So at each stage, we have our existing controls that might be in place naturally as a result of the activity. We can then add in additional controls, but at each stage that we add an additional control measure in, we need to evaluate the risks at that point. So for example, if it's a charity bike ride and we add in an additional control of everybody wearing a helmet, we then need to say, okay, we've added in the helmet as an additional control measure. Has that reduced the risk? And therefore, how much has that risk been reduced? Looking at the hierarchy of control, I'm going to use the same example of the charity bike ride as a way of working through this hierarchy. So the first step in the hierarchy of control is elimination. So can we physically remove the hazard? Now, if it is a charity bike ride and there's a set route which involves being on a public road, there's obviously various hazards of being on a public road that we can't eliminate. We can't remove the road and we can't remove the bike because that's the essential element of the event. Substitution or reduction. So can we replace or reduce the hazard? Well, is there potential to move the route to a quieter road rather than the main highway or somewhere that is more dangerous with higher speeds for cars, that kind of thing? That's the kind of thing we can think about in this example. Moving through to engineering controls, isolating yourself and others from the hazard. So that's another consideration before we move into administrative controls. So can we change the way that we work? And then finally, PPE. So that is our final stage in the hierarchy of controls. So once we've moved through those stages, we're left with PPE, which is protect yourself with personal protective equipment, which in this case could be a helmet. In other cases, for example, the minibus, it could be a reminder to wear your seatbelt. Or if it was a water-based activity, wearing a wetsuit. Evaluating risk. So how do we evaluate risk? We use a calculation which basically means the severity times the likelihood on our risk matrix. So risks will depend on the type of hazard, who's exposed, how much they've been exposed, how long they've been exposed for, how it's controlled, and the level of competence. So we have the potential outcome severity times the likelihood of an incident, and that's how we get our risk level. So evaluating the risk, as you can see there, we have different scores and different gradings, as well as our risk level. So if we do a risk assessment and the outcome is that there's a tolerable risk, that means that generally speaking, an event or an activity should be safe to go ahead with those control measures. If we're coming out with a much higher score at the intolerable or substantial level, we then need to look at adding additional control measures to reduce that risk or potentially an event not going ahead in that format. So recording your findings. So once you have created and conducted a risk assessment, you should record them incognito, and you should implement your actions and communicate your findings. You can find all the necessary templates for risk assessments on the Committee Hub in the Health and Safety section. So reviewing your assessment and updating it as and when necessary. So when do we need to review a risk assessment? So we need to review it after an accident or an incident or near miss. And near miss is defined as something where we've had a close call, something that's nearly resulted in an accident or an incident or had the potential to result in that. And if this has happened, it's likely that a hazard either hasn't been correctly identified or hasn't been correctly mitigated with adequate control measures. Other reasons why we might need to review a risk assessment are changes in processes, so changes in the way that you guys work or the way that we work, new equipment or technology. What you will find in your sort of clubs and societies is you have new people joining, new committee members on an annual basis. So that will mean there'll be an increased need for review, which is mentioned in the section saying changes in the people you're working with. That will be a very high volume of change in student union world. There might be changes in legislation or policy that we will update you on, but also your national governing bodies, NGBs, may update you on as well. As time passes, higher risk more frequent than low risk. So obviously, the higher the risk of something, we need to be reviewing more regularly than low risk. And everything needs to be reviewed every 5 years as good practice. Talking about good practice, it is also good practice to be the first at your venue. So if you're the person that's conducted the risk assessment, especially on the committee, it is good to be there first at the venue and do a quick visual check prior to an activity, especially if you're operating in the outside environment, which is a dynamic environment where hazards and risks can change and develop. And we need to ensure that all of our controls are working as intended. So activities, events and trips abroad. It is essential to provide the student union with risk assessments for all activities, including your social events. That is really, really crucial, that for anything that you guys are doing, that you are doing risk assessments for it, and that you are sending updated risk assessments via Cognito. If you're doing something outside, please ensure that you're monitoring the weather and making sure that your activity can still go ahead, and always communicating with the student union as well. So if an event is no longer going ahead or you've changed the date or time, please let us know. If you are a water-based activity, please make sure there's always someone shoreside in case of an emergency. That's particularly important for our SU and where we are in the country. Down in Cornwall, we're surrounded by coast, and I understand that a lot of different clubs and societies, whether you are an ocean-based club or society, or whether you're just going down to the beach for a social event, it is really important that for water-based activities that there is someone shoreside, and that risk is being mitigated. There has been very recently a very serious incident involving another SU open water swimming society trip that was actually down in Cornwall, where a fatality occurred, and that was because of drowning. And I think in that case, and based off of that incident, it is really, really important that we're operating in a safe manner, especially by the coast. So if we are doing water-based activities, please make sure that your risk assessments are up to date, and please make sure that you're communicating with us, the student union, before that activity takes place so that we can review those procedures. If you're on campus, there may be additional forms you're required to complete, such as an outdoor space permission or food waivers. So again, just communicate with us and we can advise you appropriately. If you're wanting to do a trip abroad, please come and talk to us so that we can support you. There is obviously a lot more guidance and procedure that's required for trips overseas, but please let us know beforehand. Now, there are a very, very small number of under 18s, and we will talk to you if they join your group, because there is a heightened level of safeguarding required for under 18s, as they are classed as children. So we will talk to you separately if that occurs. So guest speakers and our guest speaker policy. This is really important. We have had issues with this in the past where clubs and societies haven't followed the correct process for the guest speaker policy. So in terms of guest speakers, it's absolutely great that we're able to host so many guest speakers, either on campus or with you guys. But it is really important that the policy is followed. So please make sure that you have a read through the guest speaker policy and get to terms with it. But ultimately you do have to give us 21 days notice prior to somebody coming in to do a speech. And as I say, if you just follow the policy and fill out the required documentation, and we will be able to support you with that. And just looking at the next slide, we obviously have the process listed out here for you. So obviously yourselves as a club or society would submit a guest speaker approval form no less than 21 days prior to the event, which is really important, including the relevant paperwork. One of our team in the communities department will then review the form, or we as a group will review it, and we will then research and identify the overall risk of the guest speaker. And as you can see below, depending on that risk, there's a different process that we will then follow. But that's why we need 21 days notice, because there is quite a lot for us to do that happens in the background prior to that guest speaker attending. So please let us know at least 21 days prior to an event happening. So reporting accidents and incidents, again, we have had a number of issues with this over the years where clubs or societies haven't reported incidents to us, and we've then found out secondhand or thirdhand through different people. But I just wanted to touch on this in general. Reporting of accidents or incidents, it's not about you guys getting in trouble or us pinning blame on someone or that kind of thing. The reason why we report accidents or incidents is so that we can learn from them and then prevent them from happening in the future. So it is really important that incidents are reported to us, and we obviously have the accident reporting form, which is available through the website. But once an incident is reported, it's then followed up by us as a team, and that's part of our legal obligation to protect and safeguard you guys as students. So once it's obviously reported to us, we'll follow up with the accident or incident and investigate it as is necessary, and hopefully put things in place and work with you guys to prevent it from happening in the future. But as I say, it's not a witch hunt. It's not about us pinning blame on people or you guys getting into trouble. It's just about us being able to prevent things from happening in the future. So please make sure that you are reporting things to us. So in terms of campus support, you can see we've got a number of different contact details. So at the SU, that is our number for the SU based in Penryn. You've also got our general email address, activities@thesu.org.uk, and our office hours are 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. Monday to Friday, which means that a member of the communities team will be available and physically present at the SU 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday. If there are any issues or incidents outside of that time, you do have the contact details for Glasney Lodge, and they're available 24 hours a day. And obviously the support and wellbeing services through FX Plus. But it is important that if something happens whilst you're on a trip or there's an event going on, etc., and it's something you would deem as an emergency, then please call 999 and contact the relevant emergency service. The SafeZone app is an app for Apple or Android devices which allows staff and students to quickly and easily make contact with the security services team whenever they're on one of our campuses. It features live chat, one-button assistance requests, and doesn't require the need for remembering phone numbers. So I would recommend that you guys all download the SafeZone app through your university email addresses and account, and encourage your members to do the same, because it also means that you can very easily request support and help from campus security staff, should it be required. Touching on insurance, it is essential that we know when and where your group are to be covered on the insurance, and we also require an up-to-date inventory of equipment at all times, and that's really important so that we can make sure that all of that equipment is insured correctly. But yeah, in terms of insurance, it just goes back to that communication, and please just keeping us informed on what you're doing, where you are, and that way we can make sure that we are compliant with our insurance policy. A big part of your health and safety protective measures will be regularly keeping an inventory of your equipment. So making sure that equipment is safe to use, that it isn't excessively damaged, that any personal protective equipment you have, so helmets, that kind of thing, are safe to use and not past their expiry date. As well as that, with the first aid kit and supplies, please make sure that your first aid kits are adequate and fit for purpose, but also make sure that everything within that first aid kit is in date as well. What we often find is that pretty much all first aid equipment and supplies will have an expiry date of some kind somewhere on the packaging. So please make sure that you're going through your first aid kits and making sure that everything is in date and available to use. Once something has been opened, so whether that's a bandage or something similar, that won't be able to be used again because it's been exposed to the elements. So make sure that everything is properly sealed, properly packaged, and in date, and that your equipment is safe to use. As well as that, I just wanted to touch on the storing of equipment. So certain equipment does need to be stored a certain way. So for example, dive bottles that contain flammable gases, that needs to be stored in a certain way, but also just your general equipment. Please don't leave it in cars for long times or in the corner of a sort of house where it could potentially be exposed to damp and become damaged. So make sure that your equipment is ready to use and not getting damaged long term. So looking at additional training and support that's available to you, we do offer first aid training. So we offer a 3-hour basic life support training course, which covers essential skills like making a diagnosis, dealing with unconscious casualties, and performing adult CPR with a defibrillator. You'll also learn how to manage head injuries, medical shock, bleeding, and suspected fractures, as well as gaining vital knowledge on various life-threatening illnesses. The training is a must for anyone who wants to be prepared in an emergency and will help you to use tools like What 3 Words to get help quickly. But I would recommend that you as committee members do access that support, and we will send you over some details on how to get yourself registered on one of those first aid training courses. Fire warden training is run by the FX Plus Health and Safety team, and it may be essential for your society. So it will depend case by case on how you operate and whether it's necessary, especially if you are using university buildings on a regular basis. But in general, please let us know if you would like any further training, and if you're not sure whether you do need first aid training or fire warden training, please just contact the SU and we can advise you appropriately. That brings us to the end of today's session, but thank you very much for your time and taking the time to read through the slides, and hopefully now you realise the importance of health and safety and our legal requirement to operate in a compliant manner, but also that you feel confident to be able to conduct a risk assessment as is necessary. If you do have any further questions, I'm Charlie, I'm Head of Communities, and I also have my team, Jazz and Tom, who are available to support you. So please let me know if you need any further support or guidance moving forward. And one final thing, there is an assessment to take for all people who need to complete this training, all committee members, and that is a mandatory assessment that follows on from this webinar. So thank you very much for your time, and please move on to the assessment now.